For this final session of our second virtual Widening the Pipeline Fellowship, I thought it was important that we keep the data journalism conversation going. I think that far too often still, we consider data journalism as the purview of the guys on the investigative team, the folks who are doing the big multi-year projects. And I really want us to take the energy and spirit from the last two conversations that we've had about the types of issues that we choose to cover and the voices that we want to amplify, to realize that data can be a part of our daily journalism, reporting, coverage, our graphics, whatever it is that we do in the newsroom. We can think of data as a way to give us a fresh take on it. And we're so pleased at this point to have the Washington Post Metro data reporter, John Harden, to come and help us explore this topic and talk a little bit more about how we should all be embracing data more often. So thank you so much, John, for joining us today.
Oh yeah, thank you. Yeah, very excited to be here and see all of the beautiful faces, and then all the faces that are hidden behind there, having the cameras off.
Well, thank you so much. So what was really important for me to do, to have you come and do this conversation, is that, again, I see the sort of traditional Woodward and Bernstein energy that's still, even though they're two generations ahead of most of you. But when we think about data, we think about chasing down that document or whatever, all too often there's still a particular image of who's doing that and who's at the gatekeeper. So I want you to start by telling us a little bit about your journalism background and your approach to the newsrooms that you've worked in, and carry us through to how you became a database reporter.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, to start at the beginning, I started professionally at this paper in Cleburne, Texas. I'm from Texas. Yeah, and worked at Cleburne, very small. If you know where Cleburne is, you were probably born there. Like nobody knows where Cleburne is. Like the circulation was maybe 3,000. And yeah, lower that. And so, and very small, but then eventually, well, you know, while I was there, I had always kind of been interested in data, even back in college, and my minor was in statistics. You know, I never really had like an idea about like how to use that for journalism. It was just like me just interested in numbers. But then when I got to the Cleveland Times Review, I tried to do stories that were kind of like data driven, specifically using census data, census data to like tell stories about communities. And so that's kind of like the origin there. And then later got a job in Denton, Texas, slightly bigger, continued using data, trying to come up with like data projects for the paper, whether it was just like mapping bicycle accidents across the city, or again, continuing to use census figures, you know, still trying to build up like that toolbox of like data sources is kind of like what I kind of used Denton for. And then at that point, I also got into coding because I realized that like, as I continued to do stories, they just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And coding was kind of a way to help make data process a lot easier. I use a lot of Excel. Excel you can do a lot of stuff with, but coding kind of like opened doors to more things. Then I got to the Houston Chronicle. Houston Chronicle is like where I first kind of obtained the coveted title of data reporter, which I had been seeking for a while. And then stayed there for about 4 years, covering, again, everything from like breaking news to police shootings, hurricanes, floods, everything Houston is known for. And then after about 4 years there, went to the Washington Post as a Metro data reporter, embedded in local. So I cover my coverage areas, Maryland, Virginia, DC, but because I'm on the data team, we work across desks. So I've been working with the foreign desks, I've worked with the national desk and all the other desks that need data work. So there's 9 data reporters at the Houston or the Washington Post, and all of us have different roles. So I guess you can consider me kind of like a wild card. Like I do work with a lot of other desks. There are 2 or 3 reporters we have that are specifically for investigative. So they work on those longer term, multi-year type of projects. And then we have someone who covers tech. We have another person who covers census, and then someone on the national desk who does a lot of politics. And so, yeah, that's my journey. I've been at the Post for 3 years, 4 years, 4, yeah. Wow, that's crazy.
Sorry, tell us about how the Post turned that corner from thinking of data as compartmentalized and you do this, and to sort of making it a part of the way the paper functions.
Yeah, so that was interesting coming to the Post, because for a long time, data positions were just on investigative. And then to get on an investigative desk, you needed like 20 years of experience, you know? So the Post, and so that wasn't everywhere, but that's what it felt like. And so the Post was kind of like that first place where I was able to like get somewhere, and it's like, oh, like they want like a dedicated data person for, you know, long-term enterprise stories, but then also like breaking news type stories as well. And I would say probably like in the last 5 years or so, you're seeing more and more of that. Like, I know that Houston Chronicle has like a data desk, and San Francisco Chronicle, and Dallas Morning News, Tampa Bay Times. And yeah, I feel like a lot of newspapers now are turning that corner where they're seeing data as more than just like this investigative tool. And it still is like, it really just like kind of like cracks the door wide open on a lot of stories. But, you know, I think they're seeing it as more of like a day-to-day short-term tool as well, which kind of like highlights the fact that like a lot of reporters should be learning these skills too. And so I think, you know, to learn these skills, you don't have to be like a specialist. Like it's not like a superpower you have to obtain from like a spider bite or something like that. Like anyone can like learn these things. And depending on what level you want to be at, you can like go full bore and be like a data reporter like myself, or you can kind of be like a reporter who covers cops, but then you also have like a specialty in understanding crime data, if that makes sense.
Can you think of a story early on that it all seemed to come together and it clicked before you were a minted, full-fledged data reporter? That's something that, based maybe on breaking news, and all of a sudden all of the things that you were starting to learn, it came together for you?
Yeah, I think I have those moments in every position, whether it was just like at the Cleveland Times Review, I was just like, oh wow, I can use census figures for this, you know. I feel like that opened a world up. And then, you know, at the Denton Record Chronicle, when I started to like learn code and build interactives and, you know, dig a little deeper in data, you know, that opened up something. And then, you know, at the Houston Chronicle, where I realized that I could actually work with big data sets. Like there are a lot of resources out there that allow you to do the type of stories that you want to do. Like you're not necessarily limited, you know. For instance, like Excel has like a limit of like how many rows it can import. And so I thought I was always just going to be held back because I just always use Excel. I didn't know how to use anything else. And then I learned how to use R, which is like a coding program or software. And then that opened up something. So there are points along the way, but I think though, to answer your question, Denton, Texas, working for the Denton Record Chronicle is where a lot of it really clicked for me, where I was just like, I think I definitely want to be a data reporter. And there was a story that I did. I'm actually looking at it right now because I have it framed up on my wall, where I built this database looking at like these hidden governments in Texas. And it was like this investigative piece. It probably took me like 5 months to do. And like I built my own database from like a lot of these records. And I think that one really clicked for me because it was a story that I wouldn't have been able to find just like by looking at a spreadsheet. So a lot of times when you are a data reporter, you're looking at a lot of numbers, you're looking at a lot of spreadsheets. And sometimes it's easy to like analyze it. You're like, reporting the most homicides or the least of something or finding the average. But with this one in particular, it was something that I had to build before the picture was revealed. It was kind of like a puzzle. And so I think that taught me, I'm having this realization now as I'm speaking, it taught me about how to piece together a lot of data sets to reveal like the story. And that's kind of like a process I use today. Like I pull together so many different data sets, not necessarily realizing where it's going to go until I have these data sets to kind of like piece together all these puzzle pieces to find that through line to carry the story on.
What was that story about in Denton?
Yeah, so there are these, it's crazy. It's so in Texas, there are these things called MUDs, which are municipal utility districts. And I can send the link. I don't know if it's still online, but these are basically like these quasi governments that can be created with 1 or 2 votes, and they're able to issue tons and tons of debt. But I'll send that link, and so everyone can read it. It's probably like one of my favorite stories. But
only in Texas. It sounds like something that would happen in Texas.
Yeah,
does it happen elsewhere in the country, MUDs, or was it a Texan thing?
Yeah, I think so. It was a system created, I think, originally in Texas to help expand water systems throughout the country or throughout the state. And so other states kind of picked up on this as well. But this system that was created made sense in the 50s, but now housing developers are using it. And yeah, now it's just insane.
Brilliant idea. So I'd asked you when we did our conversation to just think of some of your stories that you're working on now and walk us through your approach. Wait, someone asked a question. Are MUDs like independent special districts?
Yeah, pretty much. Like they have like their own board, their own voting power, ability to issue debt. And yeah, I mean, if you think of them, I mean, yeah, any kind of like special taxing district, that's kind of like what they are, like school districts, right? Like school districts have their own tax, they have like their own board, they have their own boundaries, and they kind of like have like their own little government. And so that's what these MUDs are water districts, as they're kind of called as well.
Okay, so take us through, share one of your recent stories with us.
Yeah, so the process of coming up with a story as a data reporter, it's similar to like any other story that you would come up with, just about business during the pandemic. And that's like a broad range of topics, right? And so one of the main things I wanted to look at was businesses that closed, because I think that's one thing people wanted to know, like how many businesses disappeared in the region. And so one of the things that I discovered, and I'm gonna share my screen, is that okay?
Yeah.
And so this is kind of like a look at a typical report that I'll kind of create for each story when I do like a data analysis. And one of the things that I found in DC is when I was looking for business closures. So Virginia has a database on the number of businesses that are in operation, are in which ones are active, which ones were terminated, that kind of thing. And so I don't know how well y'all can see this, but if you can see this first chart here, right after 2020, this is the number of active businesses in Virginia. And you see that line just kind of like shoot straight up, which was surprising to me because, again, in DC, there are a lot of empty storefronts and things like that. And so I was like, wait, so businesses actually grew during the pandemic, which was totally different than what I had thought. There was a dip somewhere, but overall, I mean, the number of active businesses is the highest it's ever been, right? And so when I saw that, I knew that I probably had like a different story that I needed to pursue. Usually when I have a perception or an idea about a story and then the data proves that wrong, sometimes that's like a good thing. It's like, oh, like that was unexpected. Maybe I should continue to pursue that. And that happened, I mean, and so that was like a thing. So yeah, so that was Virginia, but this is like the entire DC metro, which also includes Maryland as well. So same thing, like this huge spike, the number of businesses in operation higher than ever. So then after I do that, I want to collect a lot of other different data sets. The same way you would like profile a person. You want to, when you're profiling a person, you talk to like their parents, you talk to their friends, acquaintances, enemies, their employers, that kind of thing, because you want to be able to build up this profile about this person. And the same things with data as well. So in addition to the number of businesses that grew, other data sets that I wanted to collect was, the data by particular county. I wanted to look at, the race of people that lost their jobs during the pandemic. So you can see here in our region specifically, or DC Metro, like Black workers lost their job, or 10% of them lost their jobs. White was like 5%, Indigenous Native was like just over, or hovering around 10%. This is like the unemployment rate numbers. This data set here looks at businesses that submitted a change of address. So this red line is downtown DC. So you can see like after 2020, a lot of businesses in downtown DC just kind of left. That was kind of like the ground zero for a lot of like this business exodus. And then this is just like looking at all the DC major corridors in DC. So I have all these data sets, trying to build up like this profile. And this is kind of like the process for a lot of stories. And then I'll get like a notebook or like a legal tablet or something. And then I just map it out the same way I kind of like map out other stories that aren't necessarily data driven to figure out this through line. And so what I do then after I have like all these data sets, do I have it on here? Oh yeah. So basically then like here, I will turn the story into chapters because that just kind of helps me organize the data. So first, you have like the drop in unemployment or the drop in employment, and then the look at where businesses went during the pandemic. They didn't necessarily close; they just kind of like left downtown and went elsewhere. And then I want to look at the number of people that started businesses, because if businesses surged, and who are these people that are starting these businesses in a time when there's a lot of economic uncertainty, like who are these people? And then even while these numbers show that there's a growth in in business and the number of places that are active, right? There's still like these communities that were still impacted. So this is, this chart here, going back, looking at workers of color, they were impacted greatly during the pandemic. And so you just still recover from that overnight, right? And so that's basically the third story. So that's kind of the process there, at least getting the numbers in a good framing. So it starts off with like a bunch of like charts just to see, oh, those are carjackings. A lot of charts just to get a sense of what I have. And then I kind of write it as a story, because like after this, then I need to find people, which is kind of like the next step, because I also want to find the people behind the numbers. And luckily, a lot of the databases that I collected had businesses, the name of the businesses, the name of the business owner, the date when they started a business, and I was able to reach out to them. And for the story related to businesses that left DC, I got really lucky with this one database, because in Virginia, it tells you in that database if a business was incorporated somewhere else. So basically, I just went to that Virginia database and found businesses that were incorporated in DC and moved during the pandemic to kind of piece that stuff together, if that makes sense.
Let me jump in here, because we have
sure.
a question from Risa, an investigative reporter from Savannah. And if I'm understanding her query correctly and your remarks, she's asking, what story can we glean from people who are losing their jobs as more businesses were created? So based on what you presented, would the story be that minority communities still lost jobs even as more businesses were created?
Yeah, there's a lot to it. So there are a lot of people in the region that are still unemployed. However, a lot of people did create business to supplement income because maybe they were furloughed and laid off. And some people realized that they're like, I can do that. I can't find a job, so I'm going to start my own job. So yeah, a lot of the business, there are a lot of different avenues of why people started businesses. And you can dissect that maybe like 10 different ways, and look at, 20 different communities, right? But people losing their jobs, kind of, from the story that will come out in 2 weeks, you should read it. It forced a lot of people's hands, right? Because, some people who had some sort of like fellowship or internship, and they were getting ready to like go into the workforce, after college, that job didn't exist anymore. So then they're like, I'm going to create my own job. Or there was like a father who was like supporting his family, and he was just like, you know what, I'm going to start this trucking company right now, So yeah, there are a lot of story ideas. A lot of people have, a lot of stories are similar, a lot of stories are different, but there are a lot of threads there. My story focuses on the fact that the great side hustle is what I was calling it, started because a lot of people, like their hands were forced, and a lot of businesses grew out of necessity. There's some people who created jobs or businesses because it was a hobby. They no longer had to wait 4 hours in traffic each way. They were able to turn that pet project into a new business opportunity. And then, yeah, so there are a lot of different story ideas. I hope that answered the question.
I think so.
It did, thank you.
Oh, and so, yeah, and that's kind of like the last part. It's like the finding people, because you might have all this data, but the people really help bring stuff together. And an example of one story that I have, let's do this one. I did a story almost a year ago on DC parking and traffic tickets, and how they kind of like snowball into these financial hardships. And it starts off with like this data analysis, which takes like maybe a month. It doesn't necessarily have to take that long. This one did, probably just because I was working on this and other stuff as well. But even though the data helped me find this story, I mean, it starts off with a person. And then like the data analysis is maybe these 3 paragraphs, 4 paragraphs. But then it continues into the people. So it sometimes, I have thoughts about it. Sometimes you do like these huge data analysis, but like it only takes up like 3 or 4 paragraphs. But it does carry the story, or it gives you a reason to tell the story. But one of the things I love to do in these stories is still be about the people. I think sometimes when people think about data stories or data reporters, like our stories are just going to be very, very number heavy, but that's not the case. At least I don't like it to be, because there are always people behind these data points that you find. And then another story I did in let's see, in 2020, related to crime during the pandemic. Same approach. I was taking all of these data points and putting them all together, and then, found out that crime during the pandemic rose, actually. So there were these reports that came out that said, oh, crime is down because people aren't really running into each other as much and things like that. But when you kind of like use crime data and then merge that with census data, you're able to look at different cities or look at different communities, whether if it's based on race or income level, that kind of thing. And saw that that crime or violent crime rose in communities of color compared to the white communities. So this idea that crime went down, kind of masked this sub story that was happening and getting overlooked. Sometimes you see that with unemployment numbers. Sometimes you'll read a story about unemployment, unemployment's at 4%, but that's not true for everyone. And so I love doing those kind of stories because it just shows that, just your reality is not everyone's reality, right? And again, starts with like the people, and then uses the data to kind of like connect these people together through the story. And I can send these links if people are interested.
Please do. We want to add them to
those.
To our website under resources for your presentation. But let me ask you to talk a little bit more about this issue of, you do all this work, it shows up as maybe 3 or 4 paragraphs in a larger story. For when I do that, and I got immersed in that world working for National Geographic, where you talk to 100 people and it shows up in 1 paragraph or whatever. So share with the fellows how that gives you the authority in the writing process, how it helps really every aspect of your writing. When you've got the facts and then the data so locked down, it helps you in how you write everything else.
Yeah, you literally become like an expert in it, and like you can write with authority when you have all that information and the people. It's like you're really covering your base. It's like going back to the example that I had when you are writing a profile about someone, when you are, you talk to that person and then you're talking to the friends of that person and then like the enemies of that person or in the people that employed that person. It shows that you are getting to know that person inside and out. And so the data, when you're writing a data-driven story, it's the same way. It's like you're able to you're able to, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know, just like explore all aspects of the data and get to know like the ins and outs and the limitations of that data. Like the crime story, for example, like this data set that I put together isn't the most perfect data set, right? But, you know, I took this data set, combined it with other data sets related to census data. And then, you know, there are a lot of criminologists in here as well, and other data sets to kind of carry that through. And then at the end of the story, you know, there's this methodology box, you know, that tells the reader how I did it, how I came up with it, how many cities are in this database that I put together, how many points of crime were collected and analyzed. And yeah, it really does just bring it all together. Sometimes when I'm writing a story, sometimes I'll feel like I'm lost in it, but usually when you feel lost when you're writing a story, it sometimes means that you probably just need to do more reporting. And when you do that additional reporting and you talk to those sources, I can tell you, sometimes I'll do an interview with someone after I feel lost in a story, and I'll do an interview or I'll collect another data set. And then it's just like, everything just like falls into place. Like the understanding of the data, the limitations of the data, the structure of the story comes together, just comes all together. And I guess like another, so someone in the chat asked a question, how do I keep the data and personal accounts organized in these month-long projects? So I do have a system, sort of. So in addition to like these reports, so these reports are helpful because these are literally like data diaries for me. So I'll like write one about one data set, and then I'll write another about another data set, and then these just kind of like live on my computer, and I can like come back to them. Like you can see like here, like I wrote this January 15th, but then for this one, I wrote this one in April. Yeah, and so they're kind of like all over the place. But I make sure to write all of this stuff down. And then there was one here, and a lot of this is created by some sort of like code as well. If there are people interested in learning how to code, like this one here. Like this tells me how I created this particular chart. And so if I, you know, I can create this chart and, you know, go work on something else for a little bit and then come back and then see this code. I'm like, oh, this is how I built this. And so again, all of this is just like a little a diary for me. And then even like for the people that I speak to, it's the same thing. Like I have a folder set up for that has like the slug or the title of the project that I'm working on, a folder for the data, and then a folder for interviews, which are like typed out and dated and things like that. So yeah, I haven't always been this way, but it is a lot easier, and it just, yeah, when you don't keep track of it, and you have like a lot of data and a lot of interviews, and then you're trying to sit down and write the story and you haven't written anything, it is such a pain. So it is something that I've like forced myself to do and allowed it to become a habit, because yeah, it has just been a pain in the past. So it's just to help me.
Brittany has a multi-part question. How many people are on your team? What is everyone's role? I guess that's that 9-person team you were telling me about, the data team at the Post.
Oh, yeah. So at the Post, we are a 9-person team, and all of us are embedded on a particular desk, which means, so we have like our own data team, but then we have like these sub teams that we work with. So I work with the local team. There are 3 people that work with the investigative team, 1 person on tech, 1 person on national politics, that kind of thing. However, we do overlap a lot since there are only 9 of us, and say someone on the politics team needs help with something, and the data reporter, Anu, maybe she has her hands tied with something else. So one of us might step in. We don't have a reporter on the foreign desk. And so we all kind of like help with that one as well. There's not a reporter on the climate desk or the business desk. So we all wear multiple hats for the most part. And, you know, and as a team together, we do work on our own individual projects, whether that is create a data style book for the post so that everyone is using data the right way and avoiding pitfalls, that kind of thing. So yeah, in addition to reporting, we're also working on improving the data culture of the newsroom, which is sometimes can hinder a lot of newsrooms. I've been in a lot of newsrooms where like data is just not a thing, or people don't really see the importance. Like I said at the top, like a lot of that's changing.
How often do you have to do a day turn while you're working on an in-depth story?
It's very rare. Well, actually, it happened more often during like the last 2 years because of the pandemic. So we have all these numbers coming in related to like infections and deaths, and maybe there was a day where it was the highest infection rate since the beginning. There were a couple there, like when we had the Delta wave and Omicron wave, where I was writing or helping with some quick turns. Usually for quick turns though, I don't write as much. I'll probably like write a couple paragraphs and send that to the lead writer. So there are very few stories that I'm a lead writer on. Like if you looked at my author page at the Post, like I didn't have any stories in April, which gives me some anxiety, but there will be one this weekend. So yeah, I probably write a story a month. There are a lot of stories that aren't on here though that I contribute to. And so like you'll get like a contribute to line because you probably did some data work, but maybe it didn't warrant enough for a full byline, which I also have thoughts about. But
and could you explain the approval process your stories go through?
Yeah, so that starts with our data editor. So our data editor, Megan Hoyer, if we have a story, sometimes we just pitch it to her, and she, coaches us through it the same way like a non-data editor will coach a reporter through a story or take pitches and that kind of thing and help you conceptualize the idea. So the approval process, it's basically we have like free reign pretty much to do whatever stories we really want to do, abiding by like the conventions of journalism, like if it's newsworthy, timely, some sort of novelty, that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, it's just pretty much the same thing, just kind of like working with the editor and getting her thoughts about story ideas.
So as I'm mindful of our time, let me ask you of the story ideas that I did forwarded you to consider, was there one that you can really sort of help that journalist develop a strategy for how to use data?
Yeah. So strategy for using data. So there are a lot of actually have like a spread PowerPoint that I can send. There are a ton of resources out there, and I'll go through this in case more people have questions later. Using data starts with like understanding where data lives. There are a ton of data portals out there that you can go through. A lot of cities have like their own data portals. A lot of federal agencies have their own data portals to kind of get you started. For instance, if you were interested in federal contracts, there's usspending.gov, which shows you all of the federal contracts and loans that have gone out. If you think of like the Paycheck Protection Program, the PPP thing, like they have information on that and like where all that money went. learning how to ask for records from a city is also, you know, needed as well. I mean, because like a lot of data does not exist just on these public portals. You have to ask for it. And then also you might have to build your own data set. So there are steps to it. I feel like this order is probably the steps that you'll probably go to. Like once you learn where data lives, what's missing, you'll request, and then you can start building your own. These are just some examples of stories. Looking for buzzwords when you're reporting helps you develop that data mindset. Sometimes you'll go to a city council meeting or someone will say something like, oh, this increased by X%, or this will do this kind of impact on this community. They know that because they probably did some sort of analysis, hopefully they're just not speaking or, you know, spitting hot air. But look for things or phrases like that when you are thinking about data and trying to manage data or develop that data mindset. And then, you know, there's like this basic data workflow. Once you get data, there's like this, you know, people wonder like, okay, I have this data, what do I do? You know, sometimes when you get data, it's not, sometimes it's clean, sometimes it's not clean. When I say clean data, I mean data that is in a format that you can use. Sometimes, even though it's like a city council that gives you the data, sometimes it can be, it'll have typos in it or misspellings, or like, you know, maybe instead of putting like a 3,000, they put 30,000. And so sometimes things will be off. And so you have to like clean the data and interview the data, make sure what they sent is what they meant to send, or what they meant to send. And you do that just by reviewing it with them. You know, like you get the data and then you go through it yourself, and then you go back to the source of the data and say, these are my findings, does this look right? And then like the other ones, yeah, just like I said, verify. Visualizing data also helps you to understand data. And then yeah, these are just like some of the takeaways, like identify data sets, listen for buzzwords, create a repository for your databases and online sources. That's just creating like some sort of folder structure for your data. And I'll show an example of my folder structure real fast. These are all the years that I've worked at the Post, 2018 to 2022. And then within it just has like the months that I probably had a project that I was working on. And then within that, there are all the different stories. And like, for instance, working on a carjacking story. And so in here, like these lead to the code that I have, and then, you know, like all the reports that I've written for it. Again, I wasn't always this organized, but.
Very impressive. One of the ideas that was submitted, I just am curious about, and I don't know if you have any sort of quick ideas to offer Amanda, but when she talked about wanting to measure air quality in New Hampshire, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, there are a lot of resources out there. So, you know, there is, so a lot of states have like their own environmental like agency, which monitors, you know, air quality. And so like on New Hampshire's, they have like this environmental service where you can like download a lot of the data. And sometimes this is great, sometimes it isn't, because like, you know, if you look at where these particular monitoring stations are, you know, they're kind of like spread out and like are monitoring like this huge geography, right? Which probably isn't helpful to a story, depending on like unless you're doing something about the entire state, you know. But if you want to look at a particular community, this might be helpful for like an overall look, but it's a toss up. And there within this site, they do have more monitoring stations on for air quality. At, you know, Another good resource, though, is like if you want to measure air quality, is the so the EPA has a data set called the Toxic Release Inventory, and like all these little dots are kind of represent some sort of like factory, you know, and so even though like these monitors look at air quality in certain places, you know, there are other places that monitor air quality as well from like in the federal level. So like if you wanted to zoom in on a particular part of New Hampshire and look at these factories and see what kind of chemicals they're releasing into the air, and then tie that with maybe the with this data set, you could probably do that, and that kind of will give you a better profile of air quality in a particular area when you can like really drill down to a community. I feel like air quality near factories or some sort of chemical plant are probably the best way to look at pollution in an area. Usually the places that have the most development will have more of these little things like this airports create like a lot of air pollution, right? And then, you know, that's one those are two data sets. So like the federal and then the state. And then, you know, I think one of the things that you want to look at was like the impact, and usually impact means like maybe some health conditions, right? So the CDC has like a ton of information related to health indicators in a particular city or community. So there is a project called the 500 Cities Project. And so they come out with, I think they should have a new one for 2021. But the idea behind this, this data is that it gives you the name of a city, the state, and then it gives you a lot of these indicators. So like the prevalence of arthritis in this city, or the prevalence of binge drinking, or our high blood pressure, or cancer, or asthma. And so when you look at this community in New Hampshire, you can figure out like what are the toxins in the air, for example, and then see like the type of health concerns that particular toxin might conjure, and then you can tie that to this database and see if there's a story there. So I think those would probably be the three sites that I would start with first to build a profile on health and air quality in New Hampshire communities.
Well, since we had a speaker at our last session talk about food deserts or grocery stores,
yeah,
and since we're talking about health or health in this moment, I was also intrigued by whether or not we could find data for the disparities in breastfeeding in the Black community, and with the formula shortage, whether or not people are either taking advantage of trying to get more education or information. Is there health data that might connect to, you know, the health of breastfed babies versus not, or whatever? Is there a way for a journalist to think about putting data in that kind of story?
Yeah, that one is interesting. I know a lot of people are trying to grasp and figure out like what data sources to use. The first one I thought about was this data set from HPSA. Actually, I don't think this is the official one. I think they're just using their data set. Oh, it's from here, Health Resources Services Administration. So they put together a data set related to medically underserved areas and populations. And so I don't have, oh, here's a map of it. So if you think of food deserts, there's also medical deserts as well. And the idea is like the people in these areas don't have like a direct access to, you know, like some sort of like primary care provider or a dentist or mental health, that kind of thing. And so I think that probably plays into the education of, you know, raising a child or making sure the child gets everything that they need, and that education that you were talking about. So so there's that data set, and then there's like a lot of data sets that the Census Bureau has related to income levels, which may be an indicator of like who has the best access to what. And then you can overlay that with this map, which if you need help with that, there are a lot of resources out there that I can like send your way and send to people of like how to map a lot of this stuff. And then, yeah, I think I would use this. This has always been a data set that I've been interested in, that I've never really done anything with. And so, but yeah, to get to that, you can look at like this, I'll put it in the chat real fast. But in here, you can like look at like your state and county, and it'll tell you what part of the county is like a designated area that's medically underserved. And then it breaks it down like, is it like what is the profile of this underserved population? Are they just like low income? Are they homeless? And you know, what is the connection to like the city? Is it rural? Is it non-rural? Partially rural? That kind of thing. And then through here, you can like look at the progress of a particular area. Like, has it always been medically underserved? Like, which areas of this city or county were underserved but are no longer underserved? Sometimes that ties into like gentrification, that kind of things. A lot of like communities of color have always just been underserved, and have yet to improve. So yeah, I feel like that will probably be like a really good one. Sometimes when you come across data sets, they don't necessarily give you all of the answers that you want. Sometimes, like if you think of it as like a court case, sometimes, you know, you might not have a smoking gun, but you have all the circumstantial evidence that helps build the case. And so sometimes that's a lot of data reporting. And so in this particular case, I think that's probably the best route to go.
So unfortunately, we could keep you for another hour running ideas by you. John, this has been an important conversation for me to have, because as I say, I've often thought if I were a young reporter in a newsroom right now, attempting to do the kinds of stories that I always used to want to do, would I be able to embrace data? Would I be able to do this? And you've helped make me see that it's something that is so important for us to do. So I want to take this opportunity to thank you. Wait, I'm seeing Risa says, you'll hear from me next week. Also, my former editor, Janelle Davis, works at the Post. Do you know Janelle, John?
I don't.
Okay.
There's a lot of people that work there. There's a lot of people I've yet to meet.
But so thank you so much. Let's give John a virtual round of applause, and we will be in touch with you for more advice and support. Thank you so much.